The old photograph sat in a dusty archive box for over a century. It was damaged by fire, scarred, and blackened around the edges. Most of the faces in the portrait were gone, eaten away by flames. But one face remained untouched. One set of eyes stared out from the ruined image, perfect and clear, as if the fire had deliberately avoided them. Those eyes would soon catch the attention of someone who wished they had never found them. Emma Thorne worked as an archivist at the Historical Society. She spent her days sorting through donations of old family collections. Most items were ordinary things like letters, receipts, and faded photographs. But on a Tuesday afternoon in October, she opened a box that made her hands shake. The box came from an estate sale. No one knew much about its origins except that it belonged to a family called the Ashworths who lived in the area back in 1899. Emma lifted out the damaged photograph carefully. The cardboard backing crumbled at her touch. The image showed a wealthy family posed in their parlor. A father stood behind an ornate chair. A mother sat with her hands folded. 3 children arranged themselves around their parents. Fire damage covered most of the photograph. The flames had burned strange patterns across the surface. The father's face was completely gone, replaced by a black void. The mother's features melted into shadows. 2 of the children disappeared into ash-colored streaks. But the 3rd child, a boy of about 12, remained perfectly intact. His face showed no damage at all. Not a single scorch mark touched his features. Emma held the photograph up to the light. The boy's eyes seemed too bright, too focused. They looked directly at the camera with an intensity that felt wrong for a child of that era. Children in old photographs usually appeared stiff and uncomfortable because they had to stay still for so long. But this boy looked alert, aware, almost predatory. She set the photograph aside and continued through the box. At the bottom, wrapped in oilcloth, she found a leather journal. The pages yellowed with age, but the ink remained readable. The first entry dated to March 1899. The handwriting belonged to someone named Liam Blackwood, who worked as a servant in the Ashworth household. Liam wrote about his daily duties at first. He described cleaning silver, tending fires, and serving meals. But by April, his entries changed. He mentioned strange visitors who came to the house late at night. They wore dark robes and spoke in whispers. The Ashworth parents, Noah and Olivia, led these visitors to the cellar where they stayed for hours. The journal entries grew more disturbing as Emma read on. Liam wrote about hearing chants from below the floorboards. He described finding animal bones arranged in patterns on the property. He noticed the Ashworth children growing pale and thin, except for young Oliver. Oliver seemed to thrive while his siblings weakened. In May, Liam made a discovery that terrified him. He accidentally witnessed one of the cellar gatherings through a crack in the floor. The Ashworths and their visitors stood in a circle around Oliver. They painted symbols on his skin with something dark and wet. Oliver's eyes rolled back in his head, showing only white. Then his mouth opened wider than any human mouth should open, and something else spoke through him. Liam called it the Watcher. He wrote that the Ashworths believed they could control this entity. They thought they could use it to gain power and wealth, but they needed to give it a physical form first. They needed to give it a vessel. They chose their own son. The journal described how the family prepared for months. They studied old books filled with symbols and spells. They gathered specific items like mirrors, salt, and photographs. Yes, photographs. Liam wrote that photographs could capture more than just images. In the right circumstances, with the right preparations, they could trap pieces of souls. On June 21st, the summer solstice, the Ashworths planned their final ritual. They arranged for a photographer to come to the house. This wasn't unusual since wealthy families often had portraits taken, but this photograph would serve a different purpose. It would bind the Watcher to Oliver permanently. It would seal the entity inside the boy's body forever. Liam watched from a hiding spot as the photographer set up his equipment. The family posed in their finest clothes. Noah Ashworth stood tall and proud. Olivia wore her best silk dress. The children, including Oliver, arranged themselves as directed. But Liam noticed something wrong. Oliver's siblings, little Amelia and her younger brother, trembled with fear. They knew what their parents planned. They knew their brother was no longer just their brother. The photographer prepared his chemicals and plates. He told the family to remain perfectly still. The exposure would take several minutes. During those long minutes, Liam heard Oliver breathing in a strange rhythm. The boy's chest rose and fell too slowly, as if something else controlled his lungs. When the photographer developed the plate, everyone gathered to see the result. The image came out clear and sharp. But, as they watched, something impossible happened. The photograph began to smoke. Flames appeared on its surface without any source of heat. The fire spread across the image, but not randomly. It moved with purpose, burning away specific faces while leaving others untouched. Noah Ashworth screamed as his face disappeared from the photograph. Olivia clutched her throat as her image melted away. Amelia and her brother vanished into black marks. But Oliver remained perfect, untouched. His eyes staring out with a new intelligence that wasn't human. The fire jumped from the photograph to the curtains. Within minutes, the entire room filled with smoke. Liam ran for help, but by the time anyone arrived, the house was engulfed. The Ashworth parents died in the flames. Amelia and her younger brother never made it out. Only Oliver survived, found sitting in the garden, completely unharmed, holding the burned photograph. Liam left town that night. His journal's last entry, written from a boarding house 50 miles away, contained a warning. He wrote that Oliver Ashworth was no longer a boy. The Watcher lived inside him now, seeing through his eyes, speaking through his mouth. The photograph served as a window. Wherever that photograph went, the Watcher could see, it could observe, it could wait. Emma set down the journal with shaking hands. She looked at the photograph again. The boy's eyes seemed different now. Had they always been looking slightly to the left? She could have sworn they stared straight ahead before. She placed the photograph in a protective sleeve and locked it in the archive's secure storage. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about those eyes. She got up 3 times to check that her doors were locked. In the morning, she returned to work early. She needed to verify Liam's story. She searched through newspaper archives from 1899. She found an article about the Ashworth fire. 4 family members died. 1 boy survived. Oliver Ashworth, aged 12, inherited everything. She tracked Oliver's life through public records. He never married. He lived alone in a series of large houses, moving every few years. People who knew him described him as peculiar. His eyes made them uncomfortable. Children cried when he looked at them. Animals ran away. Oliver died in 1961 at the age of 74. The obituary listed no cause of death. He simply stopped living. His estate was liquidated and his belongings sold or donated, including, apparently, 1 fire-damaged photograph that ended up in a box in Emma's archive. Emma became obsessed with the photograph. She studied it for hours each day. She noticed tiny changes that shouldn't be possible. The boy's expression shifted subtly. Sometimes he seemed to smile. Other times his mouth turned down at the corners. His eyes definitely moved. She documented each change, taking new pictures of the photograph every hour. Her coworkers noticed her strange behavior. She stopped eating lunch with them. She stayed late every night, alone in the archive room. She installed extra locks on the storage area. She said she needed to protect the historical artifacts, but really she wanted to keep the photograph contained. 3 weeks after finding the photograph, Emma made a disturbing discovery. She compared her phone pictures of the image taken over time. In the first photos, Oliver stood in front of a window in the parlor. But in recent photos he appeared closer to the foreground. He had moved forward in the frame, just slightly, but definitely. He was getting closer. Emma tried to rationalize this impossibility. Maybe the photograph warped from humidity. Maybe her camera angle changed. But deep down, she knew the truth. The watcher was still active. It was still watching through Oliver's preserved eyes. And now it was watching her. She researched everything she could about binding entities and breaking curses. She found references to similar cases in old books about folklore and superstition. Some sources said burning the photograph would release the entity. Others claimed destroying it would make things worse. No one agreed on the solution. Emma started having nightmares. She dreamed of Oliver standing at the foot of her bed. His eyes glowed in the darkness. His mouth opened too wide, and voices that weren't his own poured out. She woke up gasping, covered in sweat, certain someone was in her apartment. One morning, she arrived at work to find the archive room door standing open. The locks were intact but unlocked. Inside, everything appeared normal except for one thing. The photograph was out of its protective sleeve, propped against a book on her desk. Oliver's eyes stared directly at her chair. She knew she hadn't left it there. The security footage showed nothing unusual. The cameras recorded empty hallways all night, but the photograph had definitely moved. Emma put it back in storage with trembling hands. She considered telling someone, but who would believe her? The changes in the photograph accelerated. Oliver's figure grew larger each day. His face filled more of the frame. Soon she could see details that weren't visible before. There were symbols drawn on his collar in faint ink. His pupils weren't round but shaped like vertical slits. Something moved behind his eyes, shifting and writhing. Emma's health deteriorated. She lost weight. Dark circles formed under her eyes. Her hands shook constantly. She knew she should walk away, quit her job, leave town. But she couldn't abandon the photograph. Someone had to watch it. Someone had to make sure it stayed contained. On a Thursday morning, Emma didn't come to work. Her supervisor called her phone but got no answer. The police performed a wellness check at her apartment. They found the door unlocked and Emma's research scattered across every surface. Photos of the damaged portrait covered the walls. Notes about the watcher filled dozens of notebooks. But Emma was gone. Her bed hadn't been slept in. Her car remained in the parking lot. The only clue was a message written on her bathroom mirror in what looked like soot. It said simply, "It's watching." The police investigated Emma's disappearance for months. They found no evidence of foul play. She had simply vanished. Her family held a memorial service after a year passed with no word. Her coworkers packed up her desk and filed away her research. The photograph disappeared during the investigation. It should have been in the archive storage where Emma kept it locked away. But when police went to collect evidence, they found an empty sleeve. The security system showed no one entering or leaving the storage room. The photograph was simply gone. Some people think Emma took it with her wherever she went. Others believe she destroyed it and ran away from whatever consequences that action caused. But late at night, security guards at the Historical Society report strange things. They hear footsteps in the archive room when no one is there. They see shadows moving past windows on floors that should be empty. And sometimes, just sometimes, they catch a glimpse of eyes watching from darkened doorways. The Ashworths story spread through online forums devoted to paranormal mysteries. People claimed to have seen the photograph at estate sales and antique shops, always briefly before it vanished again. They described the same details that Emma documented: the burned edges, the missing faces, and those perfectly preserved eyes that seemed too aware. A blogger named Marcus investigated the case 2 years after Emma disappeared. He interviewed her former co-workers and reviewed her research notes. He tracked down descendants of other families who knew the Ashworths in 1899. They all told similar stories about Oliver: how he never aged quite right, how animals died on his property, how people who crossed him met unfortunate ends. Marcus found death certificates for 17 people who had close contact with Oliver Ashworth between 1899 and 1961. They all died in fires, house fires, factory fires, even one person who spontaneously combusted according to witnesses. Fire followed Oliver wherever he went, just like it had destroyed his own family. The blogger posted his findings online, but his website went dark 3 days later. His social media accounts stopped updating. His email bounced back undelivered. Friends said he mentioned finding a lead on the photograph's current location. He was excited about potentially seeing it for himself. Then he vanished, just like Emma. More people have searched for the photograph over the years. They scour estate sales and antique markets. They investigate old houses and forgotten archives. Some claim to have found it. But their stories always end the same way. They become obsessed. They document changes in the image. They insist Oliver's eyes follow them. Then they disappear. The Historical Society where Emma worked installed new security systems after her disappearance. They digitized their entire collection and restricted access to sensitive materials. But employees still report problems in the archive room. Files move overnight. Locked doors open by themselves, and sometimes in the corner of security footage a figure stands perfectly still for hours. The image is too blurry to make out details, but guards swear they can see eyes reflecting the camera's infrared light. Local paranormal investigators tried to study the phenomena. They set up equipment in the archive room. They recorded electromagnetic fluctuations and temperature drops. They captured audio of breathing when the room was empty. But their investigation ended abruptly when their lead investigator, a woman named Sarah, failed to show up for a scheduled meeting. Her team found her apartment empty, her research scattered, and a single photograph on her desk. Not the Ashworth portrait, but a new picture she had taken of the archive room. In the background, barely visible in the shadows, stood a figure with bright, staring eyes. The story of the Ashworth photograph became an urban legend in the historical preservation community. Archivists share it as a cautionary tale about handling cursed objects. They joke about it during conferences, but nervously, with quick glances over their shoulders, because they all know colleagues who have gone missing. They've all heard about collections that contain items no one will catalog. Some theorists believe the photograph never really disappeared. They think it exists in multiple places at once, or that copies manifest when someone becomes too interested in the story. They point to consistent details across different sightings, the same burned patterns, the same surviving face, the same unnatural eyes that seem to track viewers. Others argue the watcher doesn't need the photograph anymore. After feeding on the attention and fear of multiple victims, it gained enough strength to exist independently. The photograph served its purpose as an anchor to the physical world. Now, the entity moves freely, drawn to anyone who learns too much about its origins. The Ashworth house location is now a parking lot. The developer who bought the land in 1978 died in a car fire 2 weeks after breaking ground. The construction company that eventually completed the project went bankrupt after 3 workers died in separate fire-related accidents. Even now, people avoid parking in certain spots, especially the corner where Oliver's bedroom would have stood. Every few years, someone posts online claiming to have information about Emma Thorne. They say they've seen her in different cities, always near museums or historical societies. She looks older, thinner, with eyes that never stop moving. She carries a leather portfolio that she never opens in public. These sightings can't be verified, but they persist. The National Archives Service issued guidelines for handling potentially dangerous historical artifacts. They don't mention the Ashworth photograph specifically, but the protocols match what Emma should have followed. Isolate the object, limit exposure, document everything, and never look directly at it for extended periods. The guidelines acknowledge that some historical items carry more than just historical significance. Collectors of occult memorabilia pay thousands for any item connected to the Ashworth family. They've bought silverware, clothing, even floorboards from houses where Oliver lived. But none have found the photograph. Or, if they haven't lived to brag about it. The truth is that some secrets refuse to stay buried. Some entities refuse to be forgotten. The Ashworth photograph might be hidden in an archive somewhere, waiting for another curious archivist. It might be hanging in an antique shop, mislabeled and mispriced. Or it might be traveling from place to place, carried by someone who can't explain why they can't let it go. The fire that destroyed the Ashworth family in 1899 wasn't random. It was selective, purposeful, leaving behind exactly what needed to survive. Oliver's eyes, preserved in silver and chemicals, continue to serve their purpose. They watch. They wait. They remember everyone who has looked into them. If you ever browse an antique store or estate sale and find an old photograph damaged by fire, look carefully at what survived the flames. Check if any faces remain untouched while others burned away. Notice if the surviving eyes seem too bright, too aware. And if you feel those eyes following you as you move, put the photograph down and walk away. Some images capture more than just a moment in time. Some preserve things that should have been destroyed. The Ashworth photograph is out there, somewhere, waiting for its next viewer. The watcher is patient. It has already waited over a century. It can wait forever if necessary. The story of Emma Thorne serves as a warning. Curiosity about dark history can lead to dark places. The past sometimes reaches forward to touch the present in ways we don't understand, and some gazes, once met, can never be forgotten. Those who search for the photograph continue to disappear. Their research gets filed away, their warnings dismissed as paranoia. But late at night, in archives and museums around the world, security guards double-check their locks. They avoid certain rooms. They know that some artifacts hold more than historical value. Some hold dangers that time cannot diminish. The burned photograph from 1899 remains at large. Oliver Ashworth's preserved gaze continues its vigil. The watcher sees through those painted eyes, observing our world, choosing its moments. And somewhere, perhaps, Emma Thorne carries the burden of knowledge that she can never share, forever changed by meeting that terrible gaze. Remember this story next time you sort through old photographs. Remember that fire sometimes preserves what it should destroy. Remember that some eyes, even captured in fading chemicals on damaged paper, never truly close. The past watches us through windows we don't always recognize, and sometimes when we look back, we see things that should have remained hidden.